Thank you everybody for coming today. Welcome to this BFI Future Film Festival event supported by the London School of English. My name is Caleb Roberts and I'm a BFI Film Academy young programmer and a queer transgender short film writer and director. Um, Thank you for joining us for this panel discussion, Fighting to be Heard, Queer Filmmaking in Adversity, platforming the voices of marginalised LGBTQIA plus filmmakers based both in the UK and beyond, healing from hostile environments across the globe. Fighting to be Heard will give you an insight into the reality of being a queer filmmaker in some of the most hazardous conditions and hopefully open up a conversation towards how we can continue to platform and support marginalized queer filmmakers from right here at home. So we have an absolutely fantastic panel lined up for you today across acting, directing, writing, short film programming, festival directing, producing, you name it, we've got it. So if I could invite all of my panelists to switch on their videos and we'll get some introductions. Hello, everyone. So I'll sort of call on each of you, and if you could tell me your name, your pronouns, and what your role is and what you do. I think we'll start with Roy.
Hello, so I'm Roy, he, him. I'm from Beirut, Lebanon. I'm an artist and filmmaker. I work in contemporary art and in cinema, writer, director.
Amazing. Next, Pamela.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Pamela. I'm from Lagos, Nigeria, and I am a producer, director. Yeah, and I'm happy to be here.
Amazing. Adam.
Hi, my name's Adam. He, him, they, them. I'm based in the UK, but I'm Libyan. And I work mainly in film and theatre. But yeah, I guess under the role of writer, director, actor. Yeah.
Amazing. And lastly, Yi.
Hi, my name is Yi. My pronouns are he, him. I'm the director and programmer of Queer East, which is an festival that showcases queer cinema from East and Southeast Asia. And I'm from Taiwan, but I'm based in London.
Amazing. Now, what we're going to do, all questions are open to everyone, but I'll kind of lead this first question with yourself, Yi. So what do you feel, as a festival director, programmer, what do you feel are the most significant barriers for LGBTQ plus filmmakers and performers doing this kind of work in environments that aren't necessarily friendly for them?
Yes, I think for me, I think there are two kinds of difficulties at the moment. So the first one is actually a pretty much obvious one is there are still many countries across the globe that actually ban queer content on media. Many countries still doing that, no matter through censorship, official lawmaking to ban such contents being seen by people. And the other kind, I think it's I think most of the filmmakers are probably facing at the moment is the narrative, the discourse are usually sometimes dominated by one dimension narrative. For instance, like across East and Southeast Asian at the moment, there's this huge madness about boys' love. So these BL series are dominate the current queer filmmaking in many countries, and this is actually a situation of for many investors, producers, or filmmakers, the only way they can make their works probably just go with the flow to make such content. And I personally think that's actually, in a way, forbidden a lot of different voices want to break through these kind of dominant narrative at the moment.
Yeah, and I guess sort of from a filmmaker or a performance point of view, for the filmmakers among us on this panel, what does that look like on a practical level when you are trying to make that kind of work? and what kind of barriers are there from anything from funding to sort of physically actually doing it, are the main sort of obstacles there, because it is something that is from anywhere from forbidden to just frowned upon?
For us, when we were casting for our film, Baba, which is a BFI and a British Council film, one of the sort of problems that we ran into, for right reasons really, were issues regarding like casting and just people's safety. Ultimately, yeah, I realize I'm in a position of privilege because I'm in the UK. But when we wanted to make our film, as someone who's really, really passionate about authentic casting, and making sure the right people are playing the right roles, I really pushed to make sure that we like really, really like find people who are legitimately Libyan, queer, trans people, gay people. Just like, I wanted to make sure the film was representative of the people, at the community that I know and love. But one of the hurdles was really just like, how do you still do that and film in Libya without subjecting them to danger? Because when you're finished making the film and you go back and you're editing or whatever, and the film comes out, you can't guarantee the safety of those individuals when the film is being, rolled out and released. And I can talk a little bit later about specifically how we, even within like the release of the film, had particular went particular measures to make sure that the film was only seen by specific people. But yeah, ultimately we really struggled with that, and so it did mean that we actually had to make our film in the UK and cast queer people, but that were local to the UK. And yeah, I mean, casting is still something that I feel really passionate about, and I want to make sure it's as inclusive and as diverse as possible. But you can't, it's a big ask to ask someone to be in a film and put themselves in danger. Just because I'm ready to do that doesn't mean that they are.
No, absolutely. Pamela or Roy, do you have any sort of similar thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, when we were shooting Ife, short film Ife, which tells the story of, two Nigerian women who, fall in love over a 3-day date, and then they have to, figure out if this relationship is something that they want to continue or not after they find out, after one, pretty much reveals a secret. And I think one of the biggest things, one of the biggest things that affected our shooting was we shot during the pandemic, right? So we shot this film in 2020, in June of 2020. And I think that was at the very, like in the middle of the pandemic. But here in Nigeria, the laws, the pandemic restrictions had kind of eased off. So it was easy for us to sort of shoot with, restrictions, people wearing masks and hand sanitizers and all of that. But we really had to think about casting and making sure that we got people for the right roles. But it's like a film about queer people, and you always face that danger of your actors being typecasted as the gay or lesbian character, and you face the possibility that they might not get work because they participated in this film. And then you also have the challenge of security, so we had to keep it as discreet as possible, and not really say anything about the production until we were done shooting the film, which took us 3 days, by the way, in one location. And then there's also issue of funding, right? So how do we get money to do this type of work and to do it continuously on a scale that that would be impactful, or more impactful than if we didn't have money. And then we also had the issue of the census board. So we made the film, but we couldn't show it in cinemas in Nigeria or anything like that. And so we had to make we had to create a streaming platform where people can can pretty much access, because the census board doesn't censor the internet, right? So that's the way that we have to go about that problem. But it's a real problem, and those are some of the challenges that we faced making that film here in Lagos.
I think it's very easy for people who are maybe based in the West to not think of even the smallest things, like, oh, the access to funding initially, or the risk that an actor could be putting themselves in just appearing or seeming interested in a role of this kind of nature. Roy, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
It's the same situation as Adam and Pamela were talking about. Like in Lebanon, it's maybe a bit more easier than other Arab world countries where it can, like, the danger we're talking about, even a death penalty at some point in certain countries, but it's still, even in Lebanon, it's forbidden by law. You can go to prison. It's not that practiced by law, but the danger is there. But lately, during the last 5 years, I would say we've been noticing much more production and the queer art in Lebanon, especially maybe a bit more in the contemporary art, because the censorship doesn't control the contemporary art scene. So it's when it is a video or a video installation format, it's easier to be able to present it. On big screens in cinema, it's impossible to get any film that deals with queerness on screen, because this will request a permission from the censorship bureau, which is part of the general security. In fact, this is also something interesting to know, that in fact it's the police we're talking about. We're not talking about a bureau that exists at the Ministry of Culture, let's say, or like whatever. It's the general security. So funding, on the funding side, in fact, in the Arab world, there is few funding entities like AFAQ, like Mawrid, like different ones that support film productions, and there is no problem at all with queer cinema. But here we're talking about small amounts of money, considering for film production. The problem is that with the biggest entities today, especially in the Arab world, where there's a huge film festivals with a huge amount of monies and budget, those festivals, it's a big no-no to be able to get any fund from them in relation to queer cinema. So here what we notice is that it always goes back to the idea of that, for whom the filmmakers and the artists are making their work. Is it addressing a small, tiny circle in their country, or is it in fact addressing the Western audience? Is it made to go to festivals, or is there any way that those films are be able to circulate in the country where they created, in society that is addressing there directly the topics, the problems, the concerns, everything? And this is one of the main challenge all the time to deal with.
And from that kind of perspective, you've like getting those submissions in from across East and Southeast Asia, are there any sort of different barriers that are being faced other than sort of like this pressure to go towards a very particular genre film within queer cinema? And I suppose obviously that varies country to country across from what you're saying as well.
Yes, I think like when we talked about East and Southeast Asia, of course, it's a wide spectrum of like different countries, different languages and cultures. So like from my experience, of course, like when you talk about like countries like Taiwan, Japan, South Korea, they are in a way more liberal and more progressive, so to speak. And so you do see like there are more diverse different kinds of storytelling, especially if you look into like Taiwan, Japan, they are actually, or like even like Filipino, they are actually doing great in a way. Like you are seeing more and more stories that touch different communities, like elder communities. A lot of films are now looking after lesbians or queer women, and but also you will see like countries like China, for example, that it's pretty much an official ban on queer contents, like what I just said earlier. So, but I feel like there's one thing is it's not actually prevents filmmakers actually making films. It's more like I still feel like it's very it's very exciting to see a lot of especially young filmmakers. They are trying to break through this like official ban of not being able to show queer cinema. So they will find their own way of like making a queer film, and a lot of them are involved like underground filmmaking. I noticed there's a trend of there are actually a lot of young filmmakers. They are actually not based in China. They are like a lot of them are actually in the US at the moment, especially I think US and Canada are like the I've seen a lot of like queer films from these two countries, but they're still trying to make authentic story about being Chinese queer. And I think that's one thing very encouraging in a way. But yeah, but of course it's very difficult for them to making film in such an environment, because I think from what I understand is you are not allowed to show the films in your own home country. And if you do show the films and being kind of like find out, that will involve a lot of like probably like you will never be able to make films in China, all sorts of things. So it's actually still a very dangerous environment for a lot of filmmakers, I think.
And that was kind of one of the things sort of generally that you've all covered that's been a question that's been asked me when sort of I'm hosting this. It's that idea of, you know, is this something that the filmmakers can show in their own countries? And oftentimes, you know, that obviously very much isn't the case. But I kind of want to look at how you feel that your work and the stuff that you do in your respective communities has impacted your communities for the better, and that kind of larger outreach, and if you have any sort of really proud moments for your work traveling sort of both within your community and outside of it, and if anyone feels strongly about that.
Yeah, I will say that I do feel like it's a very promising time. I remember this past year I saw Netflix's Middle Eastern Arabic adaptation of Perfect Strangers with like Nadine Labaki, and like a lots of like Middle Eastern stars. And actually one of their main characters was a closeted gay man who, you know, part of the twist, the plot of the film is revealed that he is queer and has this queer lover and stuff. And the film had such a crazy response, and there was a lot of backlash. A big yeah, I mean, like there were Egyptian politicians, you know, saying things like it's like morally degrading and just basically perpetuating a specific agenda in the Middle East. But just to see a streamer, you know, take such a risk and be really ballsy when it comes to like, you know, filmmaking and the kind of choices they like, you know, choose to make, it's quite an exciting time. But also I will just say that, like, for instance, as someone who has spent, you know, a massive chunk of their life like growing up in the West and in Europe, in my mind for a long time I used to think that I had to kind of like pick one over the other, like, you know, like with my identity and being at crossroads with that, and I used to think they were kind of conflicting. And it's really weird because I've spent a lot of time in the Middle East recently, and I was in Saudi Arabia for a film festival. And I have to say, I've never seen such exciting queer creatives. I've never been surrounded by that many queer creatives who have been Arabic and also people of faith. But to kind of see that, it's been really promising. And that for me is one of like my proudest moments, is like actually like allowing myself to change my perception of what I considered was possible in the Middle East, you know. I ended up winning Best Actor at the Red Sea Film Festival. For one of my performances. I'm an openly gay Muslim Arab man, so, and winning an award in the Middle East, in Saudi of all places. I think it sends a strong message. And I don't know, I think the future is very promising, and this new generation of Arab young people are doing really, really, really innovative things, and they just don't care. And
Yeah, I think I can add to that as well, because Ife was pretty much the first Nigerian film to portray two Nigerian women in love ever. So it received a whole lot of attention because rarely do we see films, even outside of the African continent, that sort of center two Black women, let alone films like that in Africa. I think Rafiki is the other one, and I know that there are quite a few, but coming out of Nigeria, Ife was the very first. And, we didn't portray the film as, or we didn't portray the characters as people who are ill or need some kind of curing, or people who sort of suffered because of their sexual orientation or gender identity. And so we were really putting queer women, lesbians, in the positive light, and that was something that was just not seen. So we received attention from international media. It was quite a lot of attention, and we went to a whole lot of film festivals, and it was very well received. Back in Nigeria, though, where I am right now, we received threats from the census board, and they threatened to come after us and ban the film and everything. But we didn't submit the film for permission, so there was nothing to nail us on, because if we had submitted and then they said no, and we continued, then there would have been a very big problem. But we didn't do that because that wasn't the plan to begin with, right? So we had our own plans. And so what I've seen from making that film is that we've inspired a new generation of filmmakers who have been emboldened by the fact that we're able to do that, and beginning to make more films that are queer focused, even though a lot of them are sort of centered around gay men. But I would prefer, I look forward to having more stories about lesbians, Black women, being told out of Nigeria, and it's something that I'm really committed to, and I'm still trying to see how we can still continue to produce such movies. But I think that just the existence of Ife and the light that it shed on Nigerian queer women was enough for me. It was enough for us to say, okay, we are here, we are queer, and we're doing this thing. And it was enough for me that it emboldened other young filmmakers to really continue this work. So for me, that is a really proud thing.
No, it is. It's truly amazing, and it is such a tender, lovely piece that deserves every bit of the recognition that it's received. And I'm so excited to see, where you go next, and with these kind of narratives that are so vastly underrepresented, even in the West. And I guess Roy as well. Sort of, is there kind of a proud moment for you with your work, and just in general, or anything in particular, or how that's kind of impacted your community as well?
Well, the thing is that even with not being able to screen our work on publicly, or like in the commercial way of like big screens and cinemas and everything, even having it screened in underground screenings here and there, it's always good, because I grew up in Lebanon, and I was never exposed to such queer work as video, as in cinema, as like in any kind of art. So even for the queer community, it's good for like opening discussion, for like space for identification, for like to deal with the concerns and everything. This is always good. It's a pity for sure that it's not available to be able to open the discussion with the big audience, with the full society. I'm a bit less hopeful than how Adam is hopeful about the Arab world, which is, I hope one day I will reach this. But always the problem is that what happens is that in the Arab world till now, we're still dealing with a certain margin of like allowing things to happen when it's not that much close to ourselves. I would give a very like practical example of something happened with me directly. My first feature film, the last film that I did, it was a feature film that was censored in Lebanon. It was programmed in a festival with another film from Egypt by another filmmaker friend, Tamer Said. And the two films were also programmed in Beirut and in Egypt in different festivals. His film was screened in Beirut and mine was banned in Beirut, and my film was screened in Cairo and his film was banned in Cairo for political reason, his film, not for queer. But it's always like, okay, if this Egyptian want to talk about his country, yeah, we're fine with it in Lebanon. And if this Lebanese want to talk about queer community, it's fine, but not in Lebanon. He can talk about it anywhere else. So, for example, my film was screened in Egypt, in Tunisia, in Carthage Film Festival also. There, for example, I can talk about like a super great Q&A with the audience. I was amazed by the progressive Q&A that we had in a community where also homosexuality is still a crime. So there is always a beautiful moment for sure. The most important thing for me personally is that I believe that what we're doing is that we're participating in writing history. So once you do this film and it's there, if it's seen on big screen or not, it's part of the history of the city. For me, every book, every drawing, every film that is queer is saying that there is this part of Beirut that exists. One day it will be revealed for the public, but it's there, and so it was done on a specific date and this year in this city, so nobody can erase it anymore.
Mm.
And I think with like your work in particular with Mondial, it's traveled so far and it's done so well. And you know, I seen it for the first time in Belfast, where I'm from, last year at an event, and I couldn't believe that sort of, you know, this kind of event hadn't traveled this far before. And Belfast is, you know, Northern Ireland in general is a wee bit behind sort of the rest of the UK and Ireland just because of our sort of conflicted past. And it was amazing to sort of see an event that was focused about just this kind of awareness, because a lot of people, you know, we get our freedoms and we kind of take it for granted, and especially here. So that's always sort of incredible to see. And then you, from a kind of a festival perspective, you are making this platform here to showcase works that might not be able to find their home where they are. Do you have any sort of pride? You know, the whole thing is probably a proud moment for you, and it's such an incredible festival. But just if there's anything in particular you want to highlight about sort of that journey to creating Queer East.
Yeah, so I mean, the reason I create Queer East is basically as a response to what myself as being an immigrant and being in East Asia, living in the UK, is I often found like the on-screen representation of queer Asian characters is still in a very stereotypical way. So to speak, like you always see, like what Paulina just said, that you always being portrayed as a group of sufferers, trapped in like societal oppression and being like rejected by their families, stuff like that. But actually, when you actually looking into the East and Southeast Asian Korean filmmaking, there are so many different kinds of story. And I think the reason, and then I think like at Queer East, we trying to bring those kind of different narratives to share with the British public. It's something I'm really exciting. That, for example, last year we showed this intersex drama from Philippines, and then we took it on a tour to 10 cities across the UK, and a lot of audience are like were like giving us a lot of positive feedback of like, oh, it's so rare to see intersex characters being portrayed on screen, and especially it's like from a Southeast Asian country that people don't really often look into their cinema making. And I think that's kind of like the thing I get a lot of satisfaction of doing Queer East. And I also feel like as someone who probably have more lived experience compared to people may not understand those culture well, we do trying to bring really authentic cultural cinema to the country. Like, for example, in terms of like queer women narratives, under East Asian cultural context, the way of like lesbians or queer women experience their love and then their relationship is very different under Western cultural context. And so a lot of film are actually being kind of like overlooked by a lot of programmers when they look into the film, because it's not kind of like not part of their culture, so they don't really get into that film. But like what we are doing is we kind of like understand the culture. This is how a Japanese lesbian couple will express their like kinship and friendship, and also like romantic relationship. And this is kind of something we are doing here, is we kind of like trying to bring these authentic narratives to a wider audience. And yeah, and I think it has been great to being able to put on the festival and then like travel to many cities in the UK.
And it's great also, maybe it's a similar thing with Adam, where it's like when you are based in the UK and you're looking for stories that relate to your experience and they're not there, having that kind of platform and finding that community here for people is really, really important. And I know that, you know, Queer East has traveled as far as a small cinema in my hometown, and it's brilliant because I've had friends that I've brought to it that weren't familiar with this kind of cinema, or were looking for something that related to their lived experience having moved to Ireland. And it's just such a beautiful thing to be able to have that here. So I guess I know we've kind of talked about sort of the ways in which things are, but I don't know if there's anything you would like to see sort of change on a more reasonable level. You know, there's always obviously the dream of freedom of expression for everyone and safety and love, but maybe on a more kind of practical level with how you're making films, is there anything you'd like to see sort of kind of immediately change to make that experience easier?
You know, there's a lot of opposition and a lot of criticism that I generally have to deal with quite a lot, from both within the community, my community, but also with the people that I work for and the people that I work with. I mean, like a recent example I can talk to you about, one of my objectives really is just being as visible as possible, because of the lack of, there's a real scarcity, like in a real like there aren't as many like Arab queer actors who are trying to break into the mainstream, or that have been given the opportunity or allowed the opportunity to get their foot through the door, like with whether it's trying to get representation or trying to find writing and casting and like roles that are for them. But yeah, one of my main objectives is really just to be as visible as possible on the mainstream. And so recently I went up for a role, and I play this character called Kai Sharif in Waterloo Road, which is a BBC One drama. And in the process, and my producers and my employees won't mind me saying this, but in the process of playing the role, they let me really have agency when it comes to the character's background, the character's heritage, the storyline, And between us, that wasn't necessarily because of just the empowerment that I have, but also because of like the lack of writers that were in the room, in the writers' room. And so, you know, often we have people writing for us that don't look anything like us, that don't know how we speak, that don't understand the nuance in our experience. They might want to focus on things such as the tragedy and the faith and the sadness, when actually there's a lot of joy and there's a lot of thrill in my experience in my life. And so I often find myself having to negotiate my legitimacy as a human being and whether someone thinks something is believable, you know? Like, would your character really do that? But how would you know? Because you would never understand, you know? And so that is the kind of opposition that I have to kind of deal with when it comes to writing, and generally writing in general. There is just not enough being written for us, people of color who are queer in the UK. And when we do play those roles, often the comments and the feedback we get is, oh, this is too much, you know, like we can't have two separate, you know, queer characters on one daytime television show. That's too, you know, like, especially as someone who works for the BBC, you can imagine like there is a lot of, yeah, it gets really tough, you know? So that is the kind of opposition and criticism that I have to deal with. And I make it my kind of, yeah, my whole outlook and attitude on this is actually, I'm not going to wait for them to write for me. I'll just write for myself. And so, yeah, that's why Baba was written. It's why I've written and I'm working on my solo show. It's all about taking agency and matters into your own hands, you know, and really bringing yourself to the mainstream.
So no, it's incredible, and Baba is such a brilliant example of that, and seeing that from the perspective and not having that written for you in a way that just feels inauthentic and clumsy, or tragedy without hope and things like that. It's just very grounded and very real and very lovely. For folks from, for example, from the UK and the wider sort of Western sphere, how can we help support, uplift, and stand in solidarity with filmmakers who are making queer content from places that are not safe to do so? What can we be doing?
Well, there's something that, yeah, sorry.
No, go ahead.
That he mentioned is that sometimes you feel that it's always expected from you to talk about the position of the victim, or like the position where you're under the threat of death all the time, which is exactly as Adam mentioned. Also, it's not the case. Like in each country, in each city and village, queer people always existed. It's not something that just popped up last year. So, and they've always managed to find a way to live their daily life. And in the details of those, in these details of this daily life, there's something super interesting to be told. And my work, for example, because my work is very political, so I usually most of the time have something political happening, discussing it in my work, and on purpose I present the queer characters in the same way that I'm presenting any other character in my film, somehow who's like someone who lives between other people, who have friends who are not queer also, and like who deal with them. So it's also a political decision of like how to represent also the character. So, and here I would say that festivals should be more attentive to consciously or unconsciously, or with this quota or like non-hidden quota, like whatever it is, to be able to open up for much more diverse narrative coming from the other from the global south, if we want to call it this way. And maybe also something that would be important is like, don't know how, but like any focus on trans people is also very important, because this is the most marginalized and most weak community between the queer community, usually in the Arab world. It's the most publicly present, so they're more in danger, and this makes them more in risk on producing, or like afraid of like being even on camera, or like trying to tell their story. So I'm not sure what are the ways to do this, but like but this is, yeah, they're the most vulnerable, let's say.
Pamela, I know you were wanting to say something there.
Yeah, no, I was just I was just going to say, I mean, a big thing for us here is, you know, access to funding. And sometimes you find situations where filmmakers have raised a particular amount of money, but it's not enough to make the film to go the whole way. So it's like, if there are ways that maybe those kinds of efforts could be supported, that I think that would really help a lot of this content to come up to the fore. And also, I hear what Adam is saying about, sorry, no, not Adam, Roy. What Roy is saying about, you know, this kind of more excitement about queer sad stories, you know, as opposed to having, you know, having the same excitement about happy queer stories, you know. I see that too, you know. It's like people are very interested in, oh, those types of movies get more attention than the other ones. And my next film, the one that I'm currently fundraising for, is Ife, the sequel. So it's a feature film, and it continues the story of the short film. And we have no intention of making it to be a sad film, and because we are really interested in portraying queer joy. You know, you're letting people know that, okay, yes, it's difficult, but we still have happiness. We still have love. We still enjoy life, despite all of the struggles and everything that comes with being a queer person living in Nigeria. So that would be what I would like to see changed. So to have more ways to assist queer filmmakers who have sort of raised a bit of funding but are unable to raise the remaining, the balance, so that the films can be made. And then also to sort of give more allowance to movies that are not, all about sadness and victimization.
So before we go into some of the Q&A questions that our young audience has asked, what advice would you give to aspiring younger filmmakers who are just starting out, either based in these countries where it might be unsafe for them to talk about their queer experience, or people who are based here that want to connect with other countries where it is unsafe to kind of start that? What advice would you give them?
So I think for me, one of the things that I would advise people or young filmmakers to do is, before you make a film like that, get involved with the local filmmakers, right? Like people who are not making film about queer people, but just making film in general. Go to their sets, see how life is there, right? And be involved in the project somehow, because before I started making films, that's what I did, right? I went to sets. I just picked a few people and I reached out and I said, hey, I want to be a filmmaker, blah, blah. And they welcomed me to their set, right? And in being in those sets, I met other people. I struck friendships, right? So I started building my network in the film industry. So when I was ready to make a film, even if it was a short film, I had people that I could call on to say, hey, I'm trying to do this. And I got so many things on a huge discount. Some people gave me things for free, just because of the relationship that I had built with them over time, doing different things. I mean, it doesn't necessarily need to be 5 years. It could be 1 year. Just pick a year or 6 months, and just keep going, to different sets, reaching out to people and letting them let you have access to their sets. And I think that a lot of things you can do a whole lot if you are able to have the networks within your local film industry that can help you to sort of, number one, it will help you to expand your vision. It will help you to see other perspectives. It will help you to find ways of getting around the difficulties of doing film in a region like this. And I feel like it would just be a more positive experience. And a lot of the things that you would have learned from doing, you would have learned from other people's experience, and you wouldn't have to make the same mistakes again, So that's what I think. That would be one thing that I would really advise young filmmakers.
It's beautiful what Pamela just said, and I would say, remember that first of all, you're doing a film before being it queer or not. It's cinema. You're doing cinema. It's a very personal opinion. Maybe not everybody would agree with, but I hope one day we won't have any more queer film festivals, and we just have festivals where queer is not a cinema genre, but we would remember maybe that, well, there were people who tried to experiment with certain language, and maybe this language would become a genre by itself as a queer cinema, not because there is a queer character in the film. So for me, it's very, very important to remember that the cause, the idea that you're ruling for, the queer rights, everything is very important, but it needs to be a good film at the end. It's cinema, and it has its way of doing it, its tools, its charm, its passion of like how to really translate those words into scenes and the scenes and sounds into the editing process and all of it. It's a very charming word, and keep thinking that you're doing films.
So we have a couple of questions. I'll fire through as many as maybe possible from our young audience. And maybe this is one for Adam, if you were up for it. Wendy asks, may I ask how you cast queer actors? I'm not sure if it's okay to ask, hey, are you queer? Or is there a better way to go about that?
Well, I think so from story to story, from film to film, project to project, the people that you decide to work with, the process of finding those individuals and the process of collaborating will vary, and it depends on what's best and what serves the story the best. It's not always so hard to cast, but I guess in the case of Baba, it was really, really hard to cast because it's just finding those people locally, but also all the things that I've mentioned just about safety and ensuring that, like they, I don't know. I think, how did you find queer people? You could, depending on where you are, you could maybe, if you're looking for people that aren't professional actors who don't have agents or whatever, and it's more of a niche casting, you're probably likely to try social media. And I always say, keep your options open. Try not to be too specific about, aesthetics and criteria or the casting, because someone might come along and blow you away, and then that person ends up being the person that you kind of adapt and evolve the character around. So yeah, keep your options open. But yeah, I mean, I didn't really get to comment on that last advice question, but I did just want to say that, like, for me, the story always comes first, and then the medium that it takes is secondary. There's been so many times that I've really wanted to make something, and I thought originally that I wanted to make it as a film. And then I realized that actually it was a piece of music, or it was a podcast or a conversation that just, like, don't be so fixated on the final kind of the final outcome of the thing, because you don't know how it's going to manifest and how it's going to change. Oh, and also watch as much foreign films as possible. Really make it a thing of like trying to watch as many films that are foreign films from places around the world, because it's truly the only way that you will fall in love with cinema. Foreign films are the best. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no, it's quite amazing sometimes how many people don't actually watch a lot of film, but are interested in making films and don't really know what the landscape looks like either. So yeah, no, that's brilliant advice. Let's see. Someone has asked, I've lost it. 1 second. Do you ever feel pressure as a queer artist or filmmaker to represent the community as a whole with your work?
Can I answer that?
Oh, of course.
No, I think it's impossible to represent the community as a whole. So I generally think that kind of films probably won't be a good film in a way. It's like film, especially I think especially like when we're talking about queer film, it's always involve a lot of like social, cultural, political context. And I think it's very important you speak for yourself and bring your own authentic experience or the character's authentic experience. I think it also reflects what we were discussing before about like watching foreign films or like, it's very important to understand the cultural context. Like every country has their own different cultures. And when you are trying to make your films, you don't think like, oh, this is a film about Japanese gay community. No, there won't be a film about Japanese gay community because there are so many different kind of gay characters and gay men living in Japan. So yeah, so I just feel like try to understand and then don't assume anything, because I want to bring an example of it's literally happened to my friend who is a Chinese gay man, and he went to a casting in the UK, and the casting director kind of say to him like, oh, you don't sound like Chinese gay man. And then he was like, I'm a Chinese gay man myself. And then so I just feel like there's a lot of like pre-assumption about what the gay community should look like, what the lesbian community should look like. And then when you are making film, just try to get rid of those, just focus on the authentic story itself. Yeah.
I would say even that for sure no, because like it's the same no as I don't represent my country when I do film also. Like it's not, it's only my story, what I'm telling, like what I'm feeling, what I want to tell you. But this kind of pressure and this kind of questions comes simply because there is no abundance of productions, because there is only 1, 2, 3 films per year. So there's always this like, okay, but we're not talking about that and that. We mentioned this, but they're still missing that. But if we get to a point where there is hundreds of films and thousands of films produced, like there will be always a lot of things to be mentioned here and there.
I think we have time for one more. I think this one's quite interesting. It's from Sunday, who says, I'm writing a happy show about a wide variety of queer characters. The main character is a person of color. I do as much research as possible to make it accurate, but I'm aware I cannot write this with authenticity as I am a white person. I give my work to people of POC friends for feedback, and if the story ever goes anywhere, obviously insist on queer writers, producers. But how can I try and make sure it has more value and truth as someone who's white writing that kind of story?
So, if I may, so when we were looking for a writer for Ife, the vision that I had in mind was to write to tell a story that was as close to reality as possible. But I also didn't want to tell it from a perspective of an outsider, right? I wanted to tell it, I wanted that story to be written by someone who is living the reality of this story that I'm telling, right? And I feel like that is so important in making sure that your stories are relevant, that they are true, and that they, are representing what you want them to represent. Because if you are not someone who, if you haven't experienced the culture, or you don't know a lot about the culture, or you don't have friends or someone, or if you're writing from an outside perspective, it's not the same as writing when you're immersed in this whole thing, right? So I'm not saying that people who are not queer shouldn't write stories about queer people, but it would, I feel, in my opinion, that it would need, I feel like it would need to be a collaboration, right? So the more people you have thinking about something, if you have someone who, because no matter who you are, you always bring something to the table. But I think it's beneficial to have a perspective of someone who is living this thing and who has experienced life in this way. And I feel like that way you can combine your ideas and produce something that people can relate with in a very deep and meaningful way. So that would be my contribution.
No, and it's sort of bringing together all that, our talk about authenticity and giving people the voice to tell their own stories. And sometimes I think it could be a question of why do you, as a person who's not part of that community, feel the need to write that role, and instead thinking about how you can be inclusive and creating those collaborations and bring together something that brings that authenticity together, rather than steamboating sort of a conversation that you're not maybe the most qualified to have. That's great. I think we're out of time for today. And I want to say an absolute massive thank you to each of you for taking part in this panel. It's been great having a conversation with you. And I know that all the young filmmakers who have sent in questions and have been watching live have absolutely loved it. If there's anything you would like to plug or talk about, that any upcoming work, or I know with the Queer East Film Festival, are submissions still open, or is it going ahead soon?
Oh yes, no, the Queer East Festival will happen in 2 months' time. So from 18th of April until 30th of April in 8 cinemas across London, and we will be opening BFI South Bank. So please do check it out. May I just add something in terms of the support? Because I know a lot of young filmmakers are seeking support. Because I know there are different of course there's a general film funding for filmmaking, but there are a couple of specific ones I encourage everybody can check out. In New Fest, they are actually currently open for New Voices, which is funding is a grant for queer filmmakers. And also there's a completion fund on Frontline. Inside Out, they also have a refocus fund for post-production. So if you want to explore the funding schemes, just go to check out those film festivals.
I will just quickly say that Baba wouldn't have been possible without the support of the British Council and the BFI through their short film commissioning fund titled More Films for Freedom. If you are eligible, I would recommend that you check it out. It's on the British Council website and all the details are there. I don't know if the new round is open anytime soon, but absolutely go for it if you're eligible. Yeah. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, and thank you, everyone. I would just also take the opportunity to say for people, young filmmaker from the Arab world, if there is any here interested, there is in Lebanon recently something called Cinema Al Fuad, and it's they're representing small funds for queer cinema, pan-Arab. So anywhere from the Arab world can apply for this, and they're doing also a regular yearly festival now that is hosted by the French Institute, unfortunately, because it's a safe place where it's allowed to be screened in Lebanon. But it's a start somehow.
Yeah, and thank you for just being part of this conversation and I hope that you've learned something beneficial, and that feel free to connect with us on social media. I don't know where we can share our social media handles or anything like that. But yeah, I'm always open to speaking to young filmmakers. So feel free to reach me. Yeah, and good luck.
Yeah, I think the BFI are linking to everybody's work and everybody's socials, so people can see more about you and what else you're doing in the future. For all the young filmmakers watching as well, all of the films that have been part of the BFI Future Film Festival are available on the BFI YouTube to check out, and some of them are specifically queer films coming from the likes of Canada, China, Northern Ireland, America, all over, and they're brilliant. And yes, an absolutely massive thank you to each and every one of you.